Hi Jessica, how are you?
Good.
Thanks so much for joining us
Well,
today.
thanks for having me.
Could you give a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, my name is Jessica Dwyer. I'm a nutrition consultant and I consult in a range of different industries from hospitality to finance. So, I look after staff wellness incentives. So, it's all about helping the employees optimize their health by looking at nutrition and lifestyle changes. So, I have a background of being based in a lot of corporate institutes like Barclays Bank, UBS, setting a lot of these wellness initiatives in place. And yes, I'm really happy to discuss it all with you today.
Amazing, brilliant. And it aligns really nicely because the LTC, we're here to support people in the industry and, how people can look after themselves and their teams. And so I guess bearing in mind the nature of hospitality, a pretty vague question for first, how can people make sure they're eating the best that they can for work?
Okay, so first of all, in hospitality, people are working so many different hours. Some can be doing night shifts, some can be working really early. First, I try and establish making sure you stick with the regular eating pattern. Don't try and eat to your working shift, let's say. Now, obviously, if you're working till quite late at night, till all hours in the morning, you're going to need something to facilitate your energy throughout the night. So I always say, depending on when you wake in the day, try and still have your first meal about an hour to 2 hours post waking, and then still have your next meal about 4 hours later, and then your next meal again 4 hours later. Try not leave long gaps between the meals, because if you're doing a night shift, let's say, and you wake at a particular time in the day, you might leave a long gap before you go to work because you know you're going to have a lunch break at a particular time. So I always say to my clients that are working night shifts or working irregular hours, let's try stick with that routine, that pattern, trying to not leave long gaps between your meals, because this is where energy dips. This is where we activate the stress response unnecessarily. And when we activate that stress response, that leads to tiredness, fatigue, issues with sleep, and then in long-term, more severe cases, it can lead to issues with mental health, depression, anxiety. So we want to make sure that you're fueling with the right foods then within that window. So what I always say is always think of having your proteins, like start with your protein, whether it's plant-based or animal sourced, okay? Have that protein and then build around that where you have your carbohydrates, which can be a mixture of different types of vegetables, and then a starch, which can be something like a sweet potato. So having a well-structured meal then within those windows is going to facilitate your energy, and it's going to prevent those dips, those blood sugar dips, which leads to the tiredness and prevents the activation of that stress response.
Amazing. And I guess this kind of ties nicely into my next question, which is kind of how do we make sure, or how can you make sure you're fueling for work? And I guess if you think about if somebody was about to go out and run a 10K, you look at nutrition really carefully, what's going to keep me going, what's going to keep me fueled.
Yeah.
And with hospitality, jobs can be super active, and an AFD can be very common. So what can you do if you know that you're going to be having an active kind of maybe long shift, could be 12 hours? How do you make sure you're fueling and getting the right foods into you?
Great question. Because when people are having those long shifts, first of all, let's think about the effects it can have on the body. Now, I'm not big on fear mongering. I'm just going on some of the facts because I want people to understand the physiological effect it can have on the body so that they're informed to make the right choices. So when you're putting that much, I suppose, pressure on your body because you're working, you're being quite active, you're doing long hours, and we don't know what times that could be, but it sometimes is the hours late at night or quite early in the morning. So you want to make sure that you have first the right nutrients there to facilitate, again, that stress response, because it is a stress on the body. Okay, so when we are exposed to physical stressors like that, okay, it activates what's called cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that gets signaled from the brain and gets released from what's called your adrenal glands that sit just above your kidneys. And that cortisol is our fight or flight. It's our wear and tear. It's what's signaling us to prepare for action, that we're either hunting, gathering our own food. It's how the humans evolved. We need that stress response. It's very important. But nowadays, we are exposed to so many stressors. Our body, our brain is signaling the same response. It doesn't know if we're sitting at our desk and getting stressed by finances or we're doing a really long shift. We're still activating that wear and tear, what's called the sympathetic nervous response. Okay, so when that happens, when we're working long shifts, but not only that, people in hospitality are exposed to so many more stressors as well within that shift. So if your body is going into that fight or flight response, it's depleting critical nutrients like B vitamins, magnesium, zinc. These are really, really important nutrients to facilitate so many things in the body, energy being the main one. Again, production of the important hormones needed like serotonin and dopamine. Dopamine is our motivation. It's our enjoyment hormone. It's how we carry ourselves throughout the day and feel, I suppose, motivated about it. But when we are activating that stress response and we're depleting those nutrients, it's also affecting how we produce these hormones. Okay, so what I want listeners to think of, okay, so how can I consume the right foods to carry me through that shift? You want to think of those critical nutrients that may be depleted throughout the night. Your magnesium, that is one of the most deficient minerals I see in clinic, because we speak a lot about vitamin D, and naturally where we are in the UK, in the Northern Hemisphere, we don't get as much exposure to vitamin D. So, thankfully doctors and people are very aware of the vitamin D, but no one talks about magnesium. Magnesium is needed for so many important processes in the body. Men need about 430 milligrams daily. Women need 330 milligrams daily. Like, that is a lot. And even me being qualified in the industry, I even have to be mindful, am I getting enough magnesium in my meals? Because even just the soil quality alone in our foods, it's depleted the amount of magnesium that we actually have in our foods. So we need to eat more of it. Now, magnesium, people think of it maybe for muscles when they're working out.
It's literally the first thing that came into my head.
No.
I have a magnesium tablet that I have after a long run because Killian says that I should have it.
Well, that's good, because you do need, because you would have depleted your magnesium out in that run. So you definitely needed to replenish it. But were you getting enough magnesium before you went for your run?
So where do we get magnesium?
Really good question. So leafy greens, legumes, nuts and seeds, these are all high in magnesium. Even, Epsom salt baths is a type of magnesium. Now, you get very minimal absorption of magnesium because it's a different type. It's magnesium sulfate. There are loads of different types of magnesium. The one I commonly recommend is a magnesium glycinate, which is very calming for the nervous system, supports detoxification, but it's very calming for the nervous system. So it can really help with people winding down the night, going to sleep. So when you're fueling yourself for your shift, you want to make sure that you're getting a variety of foods. So whether you're blending a lot of vegetables and proteins into a soup for the winter months and having a little side salad with it, or, something like a seeded bread. You can get these seeded breads now, and packing some vegetables and protein on top on the side of a soup, or you're making a salad, or having leftovers from the night before. Always make sure that you're having something that's colorful and that's high in protein, because you're going to get the magnesium from that. You're going to get your B vitamins as well from the legumes, the whole grains, and that's going to keep you facilitated for that shift, or even after, when some of these nutrients might have been depleted.
Amazing. So I have two choices when I wake up in the morning. I can get up, make myself a nice balanced meal to bring to work, or I can stay in bed for 10 more minutes. Convince me why I should get up and make something for myself to bring into work.
Okay, so convince you. You have children.
Yes,
You want to be the best version of yourself for your children.
I do.
You don't want to be fatigued after your shift and not be able to show up for them. Making your lunch in the morning for that extra 10 minutes can give you the energy you need to show up for your children and play with them the next day after your shift.
Nicely done. Very
That just
nicely
rolled
done.
off the tongue. Promise I didn't think about that.
So I've got 10 minutes in the morning. What can I do that's really quick, but that will give me all the nutrients that I might need during the day?
A smoothie. A smoothie will... Make sure you don't blend a lot of sugar in there, first of all, because when people think smoothie, they go
just like
straight
berries.
to loads of high sugar fruits. So let's think of the more bitter fruits like berries,
Okay.
kiwi, bitter fruits, and nuts and seeds. Okay, this is where I think of your magnesium. Okay, you could put some oats in there. You could put whatever milk or water. And you could even have additional protein if you've got a protein powder there. Sometimes I like to open up some of my capsules and my supplements and pour some of that in there if it's appropriate. So you can really hide a lot in a smoothie. And at least you know you've done something for you that morning to facilitate your energy for the rest of the day. And you're getting the antioxidants that you need. Again, think of that stress response that can get activated with a high stress shift. You've got those nutrients in place. That's a quick go-to thing that you can blend up together.
It's like an insurance for the rest of your day.
And then if you don't, you know, some of that you can make a big batch of it. You could have half in the morning or, you know, whichever time of the day that you're starting, and have the rest later on. Now, I'm not saying to have it, like to have the smoothie replace your second meal.
Okay.
Still have that other meal and just try prepare as much as you can, because that prevents that, you know, impulsive choices, like just quickly running next door and getting a sandwich, or, you know, quickly running into the kitchen if that's where you're working and grabbing a plate of chips. You know, that's...
Yeah, you're at the mercy of other people making the decision for you.
Exactly. And that's a lot of things I try to put in place when companies reach out to me. I'm like, okay, how are you feeding your staff? If you know, depending on what industry that you're working in, you know, what options do they have? And are you creating that environment that allows them to have those healthy choices? You know, what messaging are you sending? Are you advocating that they have their break, they sit down and have their meal away from distractions, and they have those healthy choices? Because your environment and the messages your employer sends as well, with what choices you have available, is really key and very important as well, with the psychology side of how we eat. People in hospitality tend to just go for quick, convenient. They generally eat with distractions. They're eating out the back or at the desk, or they don't necessarily mindfully eat. And mindful eating is really sitting down, concentrating on your meal, chewing your food. Sometimes when I say to some of my clients that it takes 40 chews before you can swallow a steak, they honestly blows their mind. They're like, 40? You need to chew 40 times before you swallow a piece of steak.
We don't do that,
Nobody
right? Like,
does.
it is like, you know, with the best will in the world, like we
Yeah.
are just there.
Yeah.
We're like people on a mission, like eat and then move on to the next thing.
Exactly. Like, think of it, your stomach doesn't have teeth. So whatever you chew and swallow, that is it. Your digestive system then has to have the appropriate processes in place to break down your food. Now, can you imagine you are working late, high stress, and then you're not mindfully eating and you eat a meal? Your digestive system already is reduced at reduced capacity because it's under stress. So that sympathetic nervous response I was talking about that gets activated under stress, that reduces blood flow to the digestive system. Because in that fight or flight response, our body is preparing us for action or to fight or freeze. It's sending blood flow to our limbs so we can facilitate that action. Our brain isn't thinking that we're going to be digesting a meal or even reproducing in a fight or flight response. So what happens is some of the blood flow comes away from those organs, but yet you're sitting down and eating a meal. Can you imagine what your digestive system is coping with when you're, and then if you had steak and you're not chewing 40 times and your digestive system is not, this is where we can have issues with irritable bowel syndrome, irregular gut symptoms, and that ties back to when I said about eating with those 4 hour, making sure you're keeping with that routine, that structure, because our microbiome in our gut, it's so important, and our microbiome loves routine. Our microbiome needs us to chew our food and mindfully eat because our microbiome communicates with our nervous system. I often say to my clients who are suffering with anxiety, do you get spontaneous anxiety, or is your anxiety caused by something external? You know, something external stresses that you can clearly link, or do you just get spontaneous anxiety? Spontaneous anxiety can be linked with something more physiological happening. So it can be what's called a dysbiosis in the microbiome. So a dysbiosis means an imbalance of good and bad bacteria. So that if there's more bad bacteria, that can communicate with the nervous system. This is going to the gut-brain connection. So that can communicate with the nervous system and send great inflammation of the nervous system, which can lead to symptoms of anxiety and depression. So all of this, and this is why I work with an integrative approach, because it doesn't make sense looking at things separately. It's all about what that individual is presenting with, what is their environment, and what makes them unique. And I find when companies or institutions can really adapt that model to support their employees and the wellness of their staff, that's where real change happens.
That's amazing, because I think so many places and businesses want to take care of their people. But I think looking at, staff break times, what food is available to staff, it can be really easily overlooked in terms of what that might look like. And I guess, in hospitality, you've got chefs that kind of prepare, lunch for staff. So if there was kind of any chefs listening or like senior management listening, what can you recommend that would be, if they were to look at a meal or staff meals, what is essential and what should be in there and what should be avoided?
Brilliant. And first of all, there can be a lot of pressure put on chefs because they're expected to prepare the menu for the customers and then the menu for the staff. So there can be a lot of pressure there. So when I'm sitting down with some chefs and we're putting together some recipes for both, for menus for the customers and for their employees, I always think, right, let's not overcomplicate it, because nutrition can get unnecessarily overcomplicated.
I feel like recently as well, everyone's jumping on like all these bandwagons, and it can be a minefield.
It really can. Like, I have some clients, I know this is a side to what we're discussing, but I have some clients come to me, taking all these powders, doing all these fad diets, and they're worse off because it is very personalized, it is very individual. So when you're being inclusive and really looking at that person, I always say, right, on your menu, you're always going to have some form of plant-based protein, animal-based protein, vegetables, okay? So do it out in a sense where your staff can have a protein as their base, build on that with vegetables, preferably having some form of variety of greens. I always say try and make it colourful. Come away from beige. If you see that what you're cooking for your staff is majority the majority color is beige, come away from that. Try come closer to all the colorfuls. Give them variety. Give them the nutrient dense foods, because that's what's going to facilitate their energy. People think, and I see this so often, there's always a chocolate jar or a sweet jar there for their staff. And I'm talking to managers and I'm saying, do you want to give them a spike in glucose, a spike in energy, but then have them crash? And this is the mid-morning slump, mid-afternoon slump, depending on what schedule you're on and when you've eaten in the day. They're going to drop. And when they drop, that's when they're going to, their clarity, they can't think straight. They could make more mistakes. There could be accidents in work. You know, in some severe cases, it's dizziness with this is what's called hypoglycemia. And I see this so often with people. It fluctuates throughout the day because they're chasing that peak, the hyper response, but it will always come down. It will always drop to a hypo, depending on the individual and what they've eaten. So you want to keep that consistent energy, and that consistent energy needs protein, healthy fats, variety in vegetables, not the beige diet, not the beige foods. That westernized, type diet is not good for long-term health. You know, the rates of cardiovascular disease now, I read a paper recently where it's starting as young as people in their 20s, and then it manifests later in their 50s. So it really is important to think of the choices that you're making from a young age, and no better time to start than now, So making sure that you're ticking those boxes, you're getting multiple colors in your vegetables, you're getting a protein base, that will keep your energy consistent and prevent those hypo and hyper responses.
Fabulous. So if you have worked late into the night, do you advise eating when you get home? And if so, what? Are there foods that kind of are better to eat so that you do sleep? Or are you best just to avoid it?
No, it depends on when and what hours. Okay, so when they're getting home and how late it is into the night. Okay, so let's first start about explaining the circadian rhythm. So our circadian rhythm is how we go to sleep at night and how we wake up in the morning. It gets signaled by daylight and night. Okay, so when we wake in the morning, our cortisol hormone, that stress hormone, is responsible for waking us in the morning. That's when it should be at its highest. But as soon as you start seeing daylight, okay, your cortisol hormone should drop. And then when the sun falls and the moon rises, I always say to my clients, think of cortisol like the sun, melatonin like the moon. So when the night arises, melatonin peaks, okay, to help us sleep. Now, that's our circadian rhythm. So it's signaled by daylight and nighttime. So if you're working late into the night, you're probably gone past 12 a.m. Once you go past 12 a.m. and you're still awake, it actually activates the stress response. Okay, so I always say to clients, if possible, try sleep before 12 a.m. So if you are working late into the night and you're getting home at 11:30, I would advocate start your wind down and go to sleep before 12. Okay, but on occasions outside of that, and you're gone into early hours in the morning, you're probably so wired from your shift that you're hungry, B, you need some time to wind down, so you're probably staying awake for 2 hours, give or take anyway, or an hour depending on how long it takes you to get home and when you get home. So when you do get home, now melatonin, that hormone responsible for sleep, you've gone past the 12 a.m. so your cortisol is high. Now remember, cortisol wakes you in the morning, so people can find it very difficult to go to sleep.
Wow.
Okay, so we want more melatonin. And the interesting thing here is serotonin makes melatonin. Now serotonin is our feel-good hormone, responsible for pleasure, pain, memory, focus. Everyone wants more serotonin, but serotonin converts to melatonin, which is our sleep hormone. Okay, so if you're having a meal and you want kind of the foods that are going to be high in what makes more of this hormone, you're going to be thinking of things that are high in tryptophan. So tryptophan is an amino acid that's found in proteins that converts to serotonin, which converts to melatonin. Okay, so where are we going to get these foods? Turkey, cottage cheese, nuts, almonds, bananas. These foods are high in tryptophan. Okay, so I would always say make it quite easy for yourself. Always have, you can pick up turkey slices from your weekly shop. Always have that there in the fridge. If you like cottage cheese, have cottage cheese there, have almonds there. Sometimes I say do a nightcap where you can blend banana, almond milk, almond flour, and make a little kind of, you can warm it up, especially in the winter nights.
I love that.
Yeah, and that can be your melatonin nightcap.
And that's quick. And
that
it's
is quick.
Easy. So
it's
if you
easy.
need to get to bed.
Exactly. But if you need something to a meal, you could have turkey slices with cucumber on a cracker with some, a spread, like maybe a cheese spread or a cottage cheese spread, something like that. That's going to be high in tryptophan foods. It's quick, it's easy, it's in the fridge, it's in your cupboard. You don't have to go cooking or microwaving anything. And then another nightcap that I tend to say to some of my clients that work in hospitality, because alcohol is a big thing in hospitality, depending on what industry you're in. If you're working in clubs or bars, staff tend to maybe expose themselves to more alcohol as well. Now, alcohol is a big sleep disruptor, okay? It can make you feel like in some cases that you're knocked out, but you're not getting a rested sleep.
Yeah.
Okay. So a nightcap that I tend to say is have cherry juice. So cherry naturally contains melatonin in it. So you can buy what's called Cherry Active, and you could put a dash of cherry in some water, and you could have that as a nightcap at the end of your night because that's high in melatonin. So that's going to give you that sleep initiator. But then if you have had the alcohol, think of the blood sugar dysregulation we spoke about already. You're going to go hypo again. So when you think blood sugar dysregulation, I want you to always think of proteins, okay? Proteins to help balance healthy fats. So the turkey slices with the cottage cheese is perfect. Doing something like that because it's got the protein with the tryptophan in it. Now, another important thing is hydration, okay? Water. Water is so underrated. It really is. And sometimes it's the most difficult thing that my clients are trying to change. So first I want to start off by first calculate how much water you should be having daily. So what I get my clients to do is multiply their weight in kg by 35 mils to get the amount of milliliters that individual should be drinking a day. Some people are quite surprised. It's nearly 3 liters they should be drinking.
Yeah.
Some is, quite close to 2. But you can see how the, average 2 liters a day is, might not be appropriate for some people. And they actually are dehydrated and they're not sure why when they're drinking the 2 liters a day. Hydration is so important because it helps carry nutrients around the body. And you need these nutrients to make these hormones like serotonin and melatonin. And then the dehydration, that can really affect your focus, your mood, your overall immune health, your gut. So making sure that you are drinking enough water, but not enough to disrupt your night's sleep. Like don't at the end of your shift realize all I've drank tonight is caffeine and maybe alcohol. I haven't had any water, and then try drink 2 liters before you go to sleep.
Literally like I'm picturing my husband who works in hospitality, and he gets home every evening and he literally fills up a pint glass and downs it, and he's like, I haven't drank any water today.
Yeah.
Like it, and it is one of those things we all know we should be doing it, but it's the first thing that we drop because we
Yeah.
don't deem it as important, which
Yeah.
is not right. So that's where your trusty water bottles come in handy.
100%. I honestly, on my clients' grocery list, I'm saying add a liter bottle there. Put a liter bottle there. Now, not the plastic ones that you can buy, I mean the reusable ones. And make sure you fill that minimum twice a day. And when you calculate how much mils you should be having a day, then just figure out how many times you need to fill that in the day. And then that's your water done. You don't have to think about it. And spreading it throughout the day and not, just knocking it back at the end of the day is a better way to drink water. Yeah.
And what about then, like, would you recommend people in hospitality, like, having electrolytes if they are working shifts
really
and long hours? Is that, if they're going to find it hard to drink water, if it's unavoidable, like, would you say electrolytes would be a good way to go?
Absolutely. 100%. That's a really, really good question. Electrolytes, again, are really underrated. I sometimes get clients to just put a pinch of Celtic salt or sea salt or Himalayan salt into their water because it's full of minerals, okay, for your electrolytes. Or you can buy like non-sweeted electrolytes, because some people think of electrolytes like Diurolite, and that's just full of glucose, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, very, very sweet. So you can buy electrolytes that won't flavor your water, and you've just got all the minerals there that you need. Trust me, when people start to put electrolytes into their water, especially shift workers, they notice such a difference in their energy.
Feels like a really quick, easy win that you don't really have an excuse not to do then.
Absolutely. And I suppose the other area to talk about is caffeine, because with sleep at the end of the night or at the end of the shift, they might have had their last cup of coffee maybe 2 to 3 hours before they're going to sleep. Caffeine can take 9 hours to metabolize in the body.
Wow.
9 hours. So I would always say hold off having your last cup of caffeine minimum 9 hours before you're due to go to sleep. Because can you imagine coming home at the end of a night shift, wired from the shift, because you've been on the go, you've been on your feet, you've been exposed to potentially so many people you're trying to entertain or serve, and you're drinking caffeine, you're maybe not getting the proper hydration, your cortisol is activated because it's gone past 12 a.m, and then you're coming home wondering why you can't sleep. You've got so many factors there that go against. And sleep is, I know everyone knows this, it is so important. It's our body's reset. It resets our mitochondria. Our mitochondria are our body's powerhouse. It's what facilitates energy. And sleep is so important for that.
And a good night's sleep, not just a couple of hours kip and then straight back on it again.
Exactly.
So we've touched on getting to sleep after work is not always easy, and you've kind of covered what foods that can really help. Do you have any other tips that can help wind down after work?
Absolutely. So you don't want to be doing anything that's going to be quite stimulating. So I'd say come away from screens. So anything that's going to trigger blue light. So if you remember, I said cortisol in the morning is daylight, okay? So if you, in the evening, when we're exposed to so much blue light from screens, that can send the wrong signal to your brain. Your brain isn't thinking it needs to activate melatonin because it's getting those false signals from the blue light. So try come away from screens as much time as you can. So don't go straight on your phone, don't go straight to watching TV, anything quite stimulating, okay, because it's going to send the wrong signals. In some cases that are really sensitive to blue light, you can put these nighttime modes on your phone and on a lot of your screens, which will change the light to match the sunset. So it will really start to dim the blue light in the screens. Just don't do any late night shopping because things can look more orange. Yeah. So you can do that. You can put those settings on your phones. They're
That's
on
really
most phones
interesting.
now, most
Yeah,
laptops now. It'll match the sunset and the sunrise, so you're not getting those false signals, the blue light. Don't go paying bills right before you go to bed.
yeah,
Don't have these difficult conversations. Don't, nothing, that's going to trigger a stress response. Have a little worry list beside you that you can just jot things down, that you can just think of at another time, that you're not spending too much time thinking that right before you go to sleep, because already you're quite pumped, and you're probably struggling to turn, your thoughts or wind them down. They're quite active.
exactly.
You're thinking of all the things you're going to do tomorrow or next week or at the weekend or the days you have off. So things like there's what's called sleep nidra, so you can do these sleeping meditations as well. There's some great apps like the Calm app or Insight Timer that have really calming meditations or sleep nidra that you can listen to wind down. Come away from the blue lights, like I said, don't have the difficult conversations, nothing quite stimulating. The screens are a big thing, and in some cases, if you can do things like essential oils, like lavender oil is very calming, very relaxing. Some clients, again, depending on the situation, because which, in hospitality, which area you're working in, they like to have a shower before they go to sleep. Sometimes I say, if you're going to be up and you have the time, maybe having a bath with essential oils and the magnesium salts in it, you've got two birds, one stone there. And that can be quite calming before you go to bed. It can wind you down. You're not in front of screens. Well, hopefully you don't have your phone and your laptop in the bath. Have a book, something that's going to be quite calming. Listen to that meditation, and that I find can be really helpful for helping people wind down. Nothing that's going to be stimulatory.
So for people working in hospitality who are kind of looking at their diet, looking at their meals that they're planning to take into work, do you recommend supplementing? And if so, where do people start? How do they know what they should be supplementing?
Really good question. So I don't advise supplementing a poor diet. If you've got a poor diet, there is no point supplementing. You need to have the foundations in your diet, first of all, so that you can even appropriately absorb these supplements. Okay? The next thing, just to kind of, say a disclaimer, if you are deciding to take supplements, just always check with your healthcare practitioner to make sure that it's suitable for you in case you're on any medication. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a range of different supplements, but like I said, always check with the healthcare practitioner. So once you've got the diet in place, the foundations in place, okay, looking at things like the cofactors. When I say cofactors, I mean the things that need to facilitate something. So the cofactors for your mitochondria. So the mitochondria produces energy, the body's powerhouse. So sometimes things like D-ribose can be a really great supplement to have alongside to support your energy. It can be a good supplement to have in your toolkit to replace things like caffeine. Things that, or what I see a lot of people drinking, those monster drinks.
We used to have them when we were in college.
Oh, God. These monster drinks are just wreaking havoc with your blood sugars, and there's no nutritional benefits to them. They're full of unnecessary additives, and it just gives you the hit of sugar and caffeine, okay? But you will drop, and that's when you'll feel like you need your next one. So you get stuck in this vicious cycle, okay? So D-ribose can be something that's there to, help with energy, help your mitochondria. And then other nutrients like B vitamins, really good for energy. I always think of the things, right? Our foods like carbohydrate, fat, and protein produce energy, okay? But in between, in the conversion of all these, they need the nutrients like magnesium, B vitamins, vitamin C. These are all really important for that conversion. So having a very good bioavailable multivitamin not just kind of a standard one where you might not be absorbing and the quality of the ingredients, might not be great. Investing in a good quality supplement, okay, to supplement a good diet, not replace, okay, and doing things like the magnesium glycinate to help with sleep, maybe the D-ribose for energy. But when our stress response is being activated, okay, that can have an effect on the immune system, okay? So when we're looking at stress, I'm always thinking, right, inflammation, bacterial dysbiosis in the microbiome. So you may want to have probiotic foods like kefir, okay, Greek yogurt, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi. These are all fermented foods that contain probiotics that are good for the gut. Immune supportive foods like we've been speaking about, getting the colors in the diet, okay, where you're going to get a robust amount of nutrients. So then once you've got all those in place, it'll be very easy to navigate, okay, what do I need a little bit of support with because of how much is put on my body with this shift work, okay? And think of that tryptophan, think of that melatonin, that circadian rhythm, trying to keep in routine. Once you've got all those foundations first, then navigate towards supplements and thinking, okay, what could I do to give myself a little bit of an extra support there? But there is nowadays so many things marketed to people, like all of a sudden this pink powder is going to fix your PMS. If it was that easy, I wouldn't be working.
Yeah.
And the message that is sending to people, if it doesn't, fix their PMS, then there's something more wrong. Or this green powder is going to give me everything I need. Now, there is great green powders out there that are a mix of whole foods like wheatgrass, spirulina, they're really great foods. So just look at what foundations I've got in my diet, and that's where you need to start or continue with, because we really take foods for granted when we're marketed all of these different types of products. It deters us from
100%.
the easy
actual
things.
foods.
Yeah. Tries to make everything quick,
Yeah.
everything, convenient, but it's coming away from what the core is. And don't forget all these herbs, these healthy fats. These are all so important for like our healthy fats in oily fish like salmon, trout. They've got omegas, EPA and DHA that are really good for the immune system, really important for the inflammatory response. People aren't eating enough of this. Or if you are vegan, I'm seeing, there obviously has been a lot of people become vegan, and some are doing it really, really well, very ethically. And then there's others that really aren't, and leaning on the overly or ultra processed foods. Like now the vegan aisle or the vegetarian aisle for meat replacements is almost an entire aisle. And looking through it, it's majority ultra processed foods to make it look like bacon, look like sausages. And this is what people are consuming more of. But sticking with whole food, I often say if you have to read an ingredient list and you don't understand the ingredients, then don't eat it.
That's really helpful. So then looking at diets, and maybe if somebody was looking at, what kind of diet they might follow in order to be well balanced and look at their nutrition, are there some that maybe you would suggest avoiding, or are there others that are kind of like better than others, I suppose?
So there is a lot of labels given to a lot of diets out there, and all of them, well, I can't speak for all of them, but the core is trying to help the individual optimize health. But what is happening is some people are taking on this information and not doing it supervised, which is really important if you're making any drastic dietary changes. So let's talk of maybe, one that people might be familiar of, which is a ketogenic diet. Now, I specialize in chronic fatigue syndrome, ME, for people who are aware of that condition. It's quite a complex condition, very multifactorial. There's a lot of people that benefit from shifting into a keto, so using ketones for energy instead of glucose, okay? That is heavily supervised. It's so important to supervise it, because if you have a predisposition for cardiovascular disease and you're now consuming quite high fat, especially saturated fat, it could, imbalance your lipid profile. So if you're not aware of these things or staying on top of these things, the choices that are made with making those changes could be dangerous. Okay. And then there's other diets as well, like paleo, which is, high protein. It's like sticking with kind of vegetables. And then you've got other diets as well, like the Mediterranean diet is, to be honest, I really advocate that diet. So it's just looking at, a massive study was done at a certain, population, and looked at the rates of metabolic disease and other types of disorders, and looked at how they, first of all, eat their meals. Okay, in the Mediterranean, it's very big on family and community and eating together. So they sit down and they eat their meals together. Pretty sure, now don't quote me on this, Italians get 2-hour lunch break in Italy.
I mean,
yeah, I think so. So they really sit together and they mindfully eat, they chew their foods. And then it's full of polyphenols, so full of antioxidants, brightly coloured foods, oily fish, so a range of different types of fishes as well, proteins, the occasional glasses of red wine, again, quite high in antioxidants. So that diet gives you a lot of the critical nutrients you need and the antioxidants you need to support your immune system, support oxidative stress on the body, which is what leads to disease. So that, adapting to that in a personalized way, I find is more achievable for people, and coming away from the ultra processed. It's all about sticking with whole foods and trying to not have long ingredient lists in your foods.
I like that tip though about, like, if you can't read the ingredients list, just put it down.
If it's a really long ingredient list and you don't understand them, then don't eat it.
Yeah.
There's so many great foods, like variety in different herbs. And I often say to clients is, I'd like you to achieve 35 different foods in your week. Some people are only having about 15 and they're just repeating the same types of foods.
Yeah.
So try have 35, like a variety in foods. Now think about it. A cherry tomato is a different food to a plum tomato, okay? Or an oyster mushroom and, shiitake mushrooms. They're different types. And same with all the different types of herbs as well. So you can quite easily achieve a variety, because that's really good for the microbiome. And think about what we said about the microbiome. 70% of our immune system cells are in our gut. So we need to, we need to feed these good bacteria.
So when you say that, like, lots of people will take a vitamin C supplement because it's winter and they're avoiding coughs and colds. But actually what you should be doing is looking after your gut microbiome.
Gut microbiome, 100%. And making sure you're fueling these good bacteria, because they're there, and if they feed off what you eat. So if you keep eating the same things, you're just feeding the same bacteria. You're not getting a diverse microbiome. And I have interpreted hundreds and hundreds of stool tests where I've analysed multiple patients' microbiomes, and I can clear, just by looking at a PCR of someone's microbiome, I can tell that they're a westernized diet. Yeah,
Really?
I can
Wow.
tell. I can tell that they're not getting a certain diversity. And then I can see within potentially pathogenic bacteria. So their gut is thriving with an imbalance. First of all, it's an imbalance of pH can cause things to thrive. So like candida, yeast, and they love sugar. So sometimes when people are really struggling to give up sugar, it can be because there's an imbalance in their gut and they have more yeast like candida, which is what that feeds off, is the sugar. And candida leads to so much gut issues, anxiety, depression, weakened immune system, fatigue is a big one. So when that happens in those cases, then we have to look at rebalancing the microbiome. But if you continue to keep your foods diverse, colourful, keep the sugar low, keep the processed foods out, you're fueling these good gut bacteria, you're keeping the pH balance, and you're preventing things from becoming imbalanced and these pathogens from thriving.
Jess, thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible and so insightful. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find your information?
Brilliant. So you can find me at www.jessica'odwyer.co.uk or info@jessica'odwyer.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn or on socials like Instagram is at Jess Talks Nutrition.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.